Okay, so in this unit, chapter 4, we were looking at the tissue level of organization or histology. Remember that histology is the study of tissues, and tissues are defined as a group of cells that share the same structure and function. The four main tissue categories that we looked at were epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscle tissues, and nervous tissues, and we'll break each one of those down so you know what to study for your test. Another important thing to remember that is that tissues are made of cells, and when we put tissues together, those tissues are going to combine to form organs. And eventually, when we put all those organs together, we'll start to make our organ systems. So we first looked at epithelial tissues, and your tissues are going to include your epithelia, which are your body coverings, and then your glands, which are going to secrete or release substances throughout your body. The functions of epithelial tissues are protection, they control what is going to enter and leave the body, they provide sensory information, and they play a role in secretion. Remember, secretion is just when our body releases a substance. The defining characteristics of epithelial tissues is that they're made of cells. They have a polarity, which means they have a top and a bottom. The apical surface is going to be at the top of the tissue. It's where the free edge or the white space is located. And the basal surface or membrane is at the bottom where it's going to be attached to other cells. How they're attached to other cells is through something called the basement membrane. Cells can also be attached to cells that are side by side to one another through gap junctions. And gap junctions are going to help nearby cells exchange molecules. There's another way that our cells can be connected through desmosomes. Desmosomes, their function is to kind of hold our skin together in sheets. And then epithelial tissues are avascular, which means they have low blood supply. When we're talking about epithelial tissues, we classify them by two ways. They're layers. They can either have a single layer of cells, which we call simple epithelial tissues, or multiple layers, which we call stratified. And then we go on to classify them by their shape. They're either squamous, flat, cuboidal, cubed, or columnar, which they look tall and skinny like columns. And then you have your different types of tissues. You can read through those, review the functions and the locations. You have simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, pseudostratified, stratified squamous. It's important that you know that stratified squamous makes up your skin and your outermost layer of your skin. You have stratified cuboidal and columnar. We also looked at transitional. Transitional is unique because it allows for expansion and contraction. You find it in your bladder, and when your bladder is empty, the cells look cuboidal, but as your bladder fills with urine, the cells start to take a more squamous appearance. Then we talked about glands. Remember, glands are going to produce secretions, and there's two types of glands. You have endocrine glands, which secrete those substances internally, and then exocrine glands, which are going to secrete substances outside of our body. You need to be familiar with the modes of secretion. There's merocrine secretion. When our glands release the product, it's just released through exocytosis, and only the product is released. An example is mucus. Apocrine secretion is when our glands secrete a product. Some of the cytoplasm of the cell goes with it. An example is milk. And then the last type is holocrine secretion, and when that product gets secreted, the whole cell bursts. And the example of that is your sebaceous glands or your oil glands. Then we moved on to connective tissues. Connective tissues are again made of specialized cells, but the main characteristic to remember about connective tissues is they have a matrix. And what a matrix is, it can be fibers, fluid, or a ground solid substance that surrounds the cell. The functions of connective tissues are to protect, support, they hold body tissues together, they store materials, and they play a role in defense. The classification of connective tissues, we talked about connective tissue proper, fluid connective tissue, and supporting connective tissue. So in connective tissue proper, you had areolar, you had reticular, and then you had adipose. It's important to remember with adipose that adipose, the cells that make up adipose tissue are called adipocytes. Then we went on to dense, which is still part of connective tissue proper. With dense tissue, you need to know the difference between a tendon and a ligament. Remember, a tendon is going to connect muscles to bones, whereas a ligament connects bones to bones. Then we had dense, irregular, and elastic tissue. Then we moved on to the supporting tissue category. We had cartilage. Cartilage is just there for support. The most common type of cartilage you have in your body is hyaline cartilage. You find it in your larynx, where your ribs connect to your breastbone. It's at the end of your joints. You also need to know that cartilage is made of chondrocytes. The next type of supporting connective tissue is bone. Another name for bone is osseous tissue. Our bone tissue has a hard matrix, which makes it different than the other types of connective tissues, and it's really well vascularized. I would know that bones are made of cells called osteocytes. Hopefully you're picking up a pattern. The cells, cytes means cells, and osteo means bone. Then we moved on to fluid connective tissues. The example we talked about with fluid connective tissue is blood. Blood can also be called vascular tissue. And remember, blood is made of plasma, which that's the matrix, the watery fluid that's going to surround the cells. And then we find red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Another type of fluid connective tissue that I would know for your test is called lymph. Lymph is a liquid that flows through your arteries and veins and your lymph vessels that's going to help carry immune cells throughout your body. Be familiar with the types of membranes. That mucous membranes are going to line passageways exposed to the environment, like the inside of your nasal cavity. Serous membranes are going to line the insides of your body cavities. Cutaneous membranes are your skin, and then your synovial membranes are at the ends of your bones at joints. Then we took a look at muscle tissues. Muscle tissues, you need to know that they're specialized for contraction. And we're going to go through the identification characteristics of each one of the three types. The first being skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is the only type that allows for voluntary movement. They're striated, which means they have stripes, and they're multinucleate, and we find them attached to our bones. Smooth muscle. Smooth muscle helps move substances throughout your body. They're uninucleate. They are spindle-shaped, which means they're kind of shaped like almonds. And we find them in our hollow organs. And then cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is going to make up our heart. It's striated, it's uninucleate, and it has intercalated discs, which are the separations between each muscle cell that helps conduct the electrical impulses throughout the heart. Then our final tissue type is nervous tissue. Remember that nervous tissue is made up of cells called neurons. Those neurons help our body conduct electrochemical signals from one cell to another, and you find it in your brain, spinal cord, and nerves. After we talked about our four main types of tissues, we went on to look at what happens when these tissues get damaged. So remember, when our tissues get damaged, the repair starts almost immediately. And the first response to injury is inflammation. And inflammation is important because it's trying to help prevent any further injury. And then after inflammation, the immune response is going to happen. Your body is going to start to fight off any bacteria, viruses, or any other pathogens that might have entered through that injury. And then we went on to talk about tissue repair and how tissue gets repaired. And then we talked about how capillaries become permeable, granulation tissue forms, and then the surface epithelium regenerates to finish that repair process. So good luck studying for your test. Let me know if you have any questions, and remember, you get to use one note card front and back to help you on your test.